My family. Cut off, my education to protect their favorite. By morning, I was gone. And my name is Rosalie Dean. I'm 23 years old. I was 2 semesters away from my nursing degree when my family sat me down at the dinner table and told me my education was over. Not because the money had run out. Not because of any emergency. Because I had refused to apologize for something I didn't do. That night started like any other Sunday dinner. Mom had made pot roast. Dad was at the head of the table cutting his meat with that slow, deliberate patience. He always performed when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. My brother Caleb, 26, arms crossed, eyes fixed on his plate, wouldn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me properly in 3 weeks. Not since the incident at his workplace that had somehow, in the retelling, become entirely my fault. 3 weeks earlier, Caleb had been passed over for a promotion at the engineering firm where he worked. He blamed it on a conversation I'd had. With his colleague Marcus at a family barbecue, I had casually mentioned that Caleb sometimes struggled to take criticism. I wasn't being malicious. Marcus had asked what Caleb was like growing up, and I'd answered honestly. But in Caleb's mind, I had sabotaged him. In my parents' minds, I had committed something close to betrayal. For 3 weeks, the atmosphere in that house had been a slow, quiet storm building pressure behind every closed door. So when Dad put his fork down and folded his hands that Sunday, I already knew something was coming, I just didn't know how far it would reach. He said it plainly. As long as I was living under their roof and accepting their financial support, I was a representative of this family. And representatives of... This family did not go around undermining their siblings to strangers. Caleb deserved a real apology, not the half-hearted sorry I'd offered 2 weeks before. And if I couldn't bring myself to do that, they would be pausing their contributions to my tuition until I could demonstrate that I understood the seriousness of what I had done. My mother didn't say anything. She just kept her eyes on her plate and reached over to refill Caleb's water glass. That told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. I sat there for a moment and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something quieter than anger. Something that felt like a door closing. I had spent 23 years watching my parents treat Caleb like the sun around which our entire family orbited. Every school play where his performance got louder applause. Every holiday where his preferences determined the menu and the location. Every argument where his version of events was the version that survived. I had accepted all of it because I loved my family, and because I had always believed that love required accommodation. But sitting there that night, being told that my education, my future, 2 years of sacrifice and 5 a.m. study sessions would be held hostage until I apologized to a man who had never once been held accountable for anything. I felt that accommodation reach its absolute limit. I looked at my dad. I looked at Caleb, and I said one word. All right. Not all right? I'll apologize. Not all right? You've made your point. Just, all right. Like a period at the end of a sentence that had been going on for far too long. My dad nodded like he'd won something. My mom exhaled. Caleb finally looked up at me, and I held his gaze for just a second before I pushed back my chair, folded my napkin onto the table, and walked upstairs. I did not sleep that night. By 10 o'clock, I had pulled 2 suitcases from the top of my closet. By midnight, they were full. Clothes, documents, nursing textbooks, the small locked box where I kept my savings passbook and my grandmother's ring. I moved quietly and methodically, like I'd been planning this for years without knowing it. Had a friend named Dara, who had been offering me her spare room for 6 months. Every time she sensed things at home were getting worse. I texted her at 12:47 a.m. She replied in under 2 minutes. I'll leave the key under the mat. By 4 in the morning, my car was loaded. I sat in the driver's seat in the dark driveway and looked at the house where I had grown up. The porch light. My mother always left on. The basketball hoop Caleb had begged for at 14 and used twice. The rose bushes my grandmother had planted along the front walk. I didn't feel the sentimental collapse I had always imagined I'd feel leaving a place like that. I felt clear, frighteningly, completely clear. I drove to Dara's, slept 4 hours, woke up, made coffee, and started researching emergency financial aid options for my final 2 semesters. There were more than I expected. I also had a part-time job at a medical clinic that I'd kept quiet from my parents, because they'd always framed working as unnecessary. We take care of you. Why do you need to work? That job, it turned out, was the thing that would hold me together. My phone started ringing around 8 in the morning. Mom first, then Dad. I let them go to voicemail and kept typing. What I had not planned for, in any version of the conversation, I'd rehearsed in my head on the drive over, was the message Caleb sent me at 8:43 a.m., 4 words. Please tell me you didn't. No context, no explanation of what he thought I'd done. Just raw, pale panic compressed into a text message from a man who had spent 3 weeks acting like he held every card at that table. I stared at it. Then my phone rang again. This time I picked up. It was my dad, and his voice had lost the measured authority it always carried at dinner. He sounded like a man who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found bare floors. Rosalie, send what? What did you send? And that was the moment I realized. Whatever Caleb was afraid I had done, I hadn't done it yet. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I had not sent anything. I had not made any calls, written any emails, or contacted anyone at Caleb's company. I had simply packed my bags and left. Whatever had drained the color from Caleb's face and pushed him to send that panicked message before 9 in the morning, that existed entirely inside his own guilt. And that guilt, it turned out, was carrying a lot more weight than I had ever known. I told my dad the truth. I said I hadn't sent anything. I said I had packed my room, loaded my car, and left while they were sleeping. I said I was safe. I was at a friend's, and I'd be in touch when I was ready. He went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that comes right before something breaks, and said he needed to call me back. He hung up before I could respond. I sat at Dara's kitchen table with my coffee going cold and my phone face up in front of me and waited. Dara didn't ask questions. She just put a plate of toast in front of me and sat across from me reading a book like it was any ordinary morning, and I loved her for that more than I could say. The call back came 40 minutes later. It wasn't my dad. It was my mother, and she was crying. Not the soft, careful tears she used when she wanted to manage a situation, but real crying. Unguarded. A little frightening. She told me that after my father got off the phone with me, he had gone to find Caleb to tell him I hadn't sent anything. Caleb had not looked relieved. Caleb had looked worse. Because my father, for the first time in as long as I could remember, had looked at his son's face and asked the question he had apparently never thought to ask before. And Caleb, alone in a room with a father who was no longer nodding and validating and smoothing things over, hadn't been able to hold the story together. What came out, in pieces, haltingly, the way things come out when someone's been keeping them down through sheer force of performance, was this. Caleb had not been passed over for the promotion because of anything I said at that barbecue. He had been passed over because of a formal complaint filed against him by 2 junior colleagues who said he had taken credit for their project work on 3 separate occasions and had spoken to them in ways that made the work environment hostile. The complaint was documented. HR had records, and Caleb, rather than face any of that at home, had constructed a version of events where I was the villain. He had fed that version to my parents, and my parents, who had spent decades finding it easier to believe in Caleb's version of any story, had accepted it completely. They had used it to pressure me, to threaten my education, to sit at that dinner table with the full weight of parental authority behind a lie. My mother told me all of this in a voice that kept breaking. She said she hadn't known. I believed her. I also knew that not knowing had required a great deal of practiced effort on her part. She said my father was downstairs and wasn't speaking, that Caleb had gone to his room and closed the door, that the house felt different. I didn't say anything to that, because I wasn't sure what comfort I could honestly offer. What I did say was that I needed time, that I wasn't ready to come home, that I wasn't sure home was even the right word for that place anymore. I said that what had happened at that dinner table wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. My education had been used as a weapon. My future had been made conditional on my silence and my submission. Even if Caleb had been telling the truth about everything, that would have been wrong. And now that it was clear he hadn't been telling the truth about anything, I needed space to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with people who had been so willing to believe the worst of me. My mother said she understood. I think she meant it. The weeks that followed were hard in the practical, unglamorous way that real life is hard. I filed for emergency financial aid and got a partial grant that covered